He thought it was the happiest day of his life. Instead, it became his last. On the morning of February 27, 2018, 25-year-old Patrick DeLaCerda walked to the front door of his home in Deltona, Florida. He believed a package had arrived, the custom engagement ring he had ordered for his fiancée, Jessica. Patrick was young, in love, and planning a future that seemed full of promise. But the moment he opened the door, a high-powered rifle was waiting. For shots tore through the air. Patrick collapsed instantly, shot in the head, chest, and hip. His dream of a life with Jessica ended in seconds. For Jessica, the silence was unbearable. She always got a call from Patrick in the mornings. His voice telling her he loved her. His reassurance that everything was okay. But that morning, the call never came. Instead, an uneasy dread washed over her. By the time she rushed to his home, she was met with a nightmare she could never forget. Patrick's body lying in a pool of blood at the entrance to the house. Detectives knew right away this was no random act of violence. The killer hadn't stumbled onto the property by chance. He had set a trap. The phone call about a package was bait, meant to draw Patrick out. The ambush was carefully planned, coldly executed, and deeply personal. Whoever pulled that trigger wanted Patrick gone. As investigators searched for answers, they quickly learned Patrick had no enemies of his own. But Jessica did. In the shadows of her past was a man who refused to let her go. A man who had threatened before. A man whose jealousy would turn into obsession, and whose obsession would lead to murder. This is the story of how love and hope collided with rage and control. The story of an ambush in the doorway of a home, and the unraveling of a plan so calculated it shocked even seasoned detectives. Patrick DeLaCerda wasn't just another young man in his 20s. He was a son, a fiancé, and a man who believed he had finally found the love of his life. He worked construction with his father, lived simply, and carried himself with the kind of warmth that made people trust him. To his mom, he was her pride. To Jessica, he was her safe place after years of heartbreak. Jessica had recently escaped a long, draining relationship with Gregory Bender, a man she had dated for nearly 8 years. On the surface, Greg was successful, well-educated, wealthy, living in a beautiful home. But behind closed doors, he was jealous, controlling, and unpredictable. Their relationship ended badly, leaving Jessica scarred and cautious. So when she met Patrick through a dating app in 2017, it felt like a second chance. The connection was instant. She described it as love at first sight. Patrick didn't just date her, he adored her. He left her goodnight voicemails, called her first thing in the morning, and reminded her every day that she was loved. For Jessica, it was something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine happiness. Within months, Patrick proposed. The first ring was only temporary, a promise of something better to come. The second, custom-made engagement ring was being crafted, a symbol of their fresh start and the future they dreamed of together. They talked about moving in, starting a family, and leaving the past behind. But Greg never really let go. Even after Jessica left him, he lingered like a shadow, calling, sending messages, reminding her of his presence. Sometimes he was angry, sometimes manipulative, but always looming. Jessica confided in Patrick about the threats Greg had made in the past. Words about hiring a hitman, about doing something violent if he couldn't have her. Patrick wasn't the type to live in fear, but he also knew Greg's anger was dangerous. Still, he pushed forward. Love was stronger than fear, and he was determined to build a life with Jessica. But what neither of them realized was that Greg wasn't just angry. He was planning. The morning of February 27, 2018, began like any other for Patrick. He texted Jessica, wished her a good morning, and told her he loved her. But this wasn't just any day. He believed his custom engagement ring was finally arriving. That ring symbolized everything he wanted. A future, a family, a forever with Jessica. Then came the phone call. A man said there was a package waiting at the gate. To Patrick, it sounded routine. He thought it was the delivery he'd been waiting for. Excited, he walked down the path toward the front door, completely unaware that he was stepping into a trap. Jessica, meanwhile, was driving to work. Normally, she'd get her usual morning call from Patrick. But this time her phone stayed silent. A knot formed in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At the house, as Patrick reached for the door, the silence shattered. A rifle fired. Then another shot. And another. For bullets ripped through him, shattering the glass, echoing across the property. Patrick collapsed instantly, struck in the head, chest, and hip. He never had the chance to defend himself. Minutes later, Jessica rushed to his home, climbing over the fence in panic. What she saw stopped her cold. Patrick's body lay in the doorway, half inside, half outside, surrounded by blood. The man she had planned to marry was gone, stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. Deputies arrived quickly, weapons drawn, unsure if the gunman was still hiding nearby. The scene told them everything they needed to know. This wasn't random. The placement of the shell casings, the way the shooter had waited, the phone call that lured Patrick out. It all screamed of a calculated ambush. Someone had planned this moment. Someone had been waiting for Patrick to open that door. And whoever it was, they didn't just want to scare him. They wanted him dead. For Jessica, the horror gave way to a chilling realization. She remembered the threats, the warnings from Gregory Bender. He had said he would put a plan into action. He had said he could kill. Now, standing in Patrick's yard, she wondered, had Greg finally done it? Detectives arriving at the scene knew right away. This wasn't a random shooting. The killer had lured Patrick out with that phone call about a package, then waited for him to open the door. The use of a high-powered rifle, the careful placement, the precision, it all pointed to a calculated plan. Detective Chad Weaver led the case. His first question was simple. Who would want Patrick dead? By all accounts, Patrick was kind, hardworking, and had no enemies. But then Jessica stepped forward with a name, one that changed everything. Gregory Bender, her ex-boyfriend of 8 years. Jessica told Weaver about Greg's jealousy, his threats, and his refusal to let her go. She described how Greg once said he would put a plan into action, even talking about hiring a hitman if necessary. She explained how Patrick had received disturbing messages in the past, and how Greg's presence had always loomed over their relationship like a shadow. Weaver dug deeper and discovered that Patrick and Jessica had already taken steps to protect themselves. Months earlier, they had gone to court and secured a restraining order against Greg. They even presented the judge with texts and voicemails where Greg threatened violence. The court ordered Greg to stay away and to surrender his arsenal of weapons. But Greg didn't stay away, and as Weaver would soon learn, he hadn't surrendered everything either. To test her suspicions, detectives asked Jessica to call Greg while they listened in. It was risky, but Jessica agreed. On the phone, Greg's bitterness poured out. He accused Jessica of ruining his life, mocked her engagement, and deflected when asked about Patrick's death. He never confessed, but his words gave Weaver chills. It was clear Greg was still obsessed. Then Jessica revealed one more haunting detail. Before she left Greg for good, she had stumbled on something disturbing at his house. A notebook. In it, Greg had written what looked like a murder plan. Step-by-step notes on how to sneak onto property, avoid leaving footprints, and strike when the victim was alone. At the time, Jessica hadn't realized how real it might become. But now, with Patrick gone, those pages seemed like a blueprint for murder. Armed with this information, detectives got a search warrant for Greg's home. What they found inside would confirm their worst fears, and give them the evidence they needed to bring him down. When investigators searched Gregory Bender's home, they quickly realized Jessica's memory had been right. In a trash can, tucked among crumpled paper, they found it. Pages from a spiral notebook. But these weren't ordinary notes. This was a step-by-step murder plan. It was chilling in its detail. A sketch of Patrick's property. Instructions to use duct tape on shoes to avoid prints. A reminder to wait until he is alone. Even directions on how to approach through the woods. It read less like a fantasy and more like a blueprint for exactly what had happened to Patrick. And the evidence didn't stop there. Inside a drawer, detectives found a spent shell casing. When tested, it matched the same .300 blackout rounds used to kill Patrick. Even without the murder weapon, the case against Greg was tightening fast. Prosecutors painted a clear picture for the jury. Gregory Bender was a jealous, obsessive ex who couldn't accept that Jessica had moved on. Instead of letting her go, he plotted murder. He lured Patrick with a fake delivery call, lay in wait, and executed him in cold blood. But the defense pushed back hard. They claimed the notebook was nothing more than Greg's dark thoughts on paper. Fantasy, not action. They pointed to videos taken by a private investigator, showing Jessica still meeting Greg after she began dating Patrick. In those clips, Greg touched her leg, held her hand, and acted as if their relationship wasn't truly over. The defense argued Jessica wasn't being honest, and that Greg wasn't the only one with motive. They even suggested Patrick's father, Max, could be a suspect, pointing to gaps in his timeline that day. For the family, it was a painful accusation, one that added insult to unbearable loss. Jessica, however, became the prosecution's star witness. She admitted she had occasionally seen Greg after leaving him, but explained she did it out of fear, hoping to calm him down so he wouldn't lash out. Her testimony showed the reality of a woman trying to protect herself and the man she loved from an ex who refused to let go. After 4 days of testimony, the jury reached its decision. They found Gregory Bender guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Patrick's family, it was justice, but it wasn't closure. Nothing could bring Patrick back. Nothing could replace the future he and Jessica had planned. But at least the man who stole it from them would never walk free again. When the verdict was read, Gregory Bender showed little emotion. He sat in silence as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. For him, it was the end of his obsession. For Patrick's family, it was only the beginning of a lifetime without him. Patrick's father, Max, stood heartbroken. He had worked side by side with his son, building homes and building memories. Now, those memories were all he had left. During the trial, when the defense cruelly tried to suggest he might have had something to do with Patrick's death, Max's grief turned to anger. He made it clear in court that he would never forgive Greg for what he had done. His only wish was that Greg would remain behind bars forever. Patrick's mother, Patricia, found some comfort in knowing her son died with love in his heart. He had been happy, engaged, and dreaming of a future with Jessica. To her, those last moments of his life mattered more than the brutality of his death. She clung to the hope that Patrick knew how loved he truly was. And Jessica, she carried the heaviest burden of all. She had escaped Greg, found happiness with Patrick, and believed she had finally closed the door on her painful past. Instead, her past had followed her, poisoning her future and stealing the man she loved. After the trial, she promised to go on living for Patrick, to keep his memory alive, and to wear the ring he never had the chance to place on her finger. The murder of Patrick DeLaCerda is more than just a crime story. It's a cautionary tale about obsession, control, and the dangers of jealousy. Patrick was not involved in crime, not mixed up in dangerous circles. He was simply a young man in love, and yet, his life was stolen by someone else's inability to let go. Gregory Bender now spends his life in prison, but his actions left scars that will never heal. For Patrick's family, every day is a reminder of what could have been. A wedding, children, a future filled with milestones he never got to reach. In the end, Patrick's story is one of love and loss. His life was short, but it was full of meaning. And though Gregory's violence tried to silence it, the memory of Patrick, his warmth, his dreams, his love for Jessica, lives on in the hearts of those who knew him. Because even in tragedy, love remains stronger than hate.